Welcome everybody, this is the 3D Printer Chat Show, the podcast about 3D printing. I'm Chris Garrett, your host, and today I've got a special guest who is a guru in 3D printing manufacturing, is an entrepreneur, is a 3D printing thought leader, and gonzo tech journalist. I'm going to have to ask what that is. He's called John Hauer. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for inviting me on.
So what makes a tech journalist gonzo?
Well, the whole idea of gonzo journalism started with Hunter Thompson. He was a big, I would say, a big influence on me and my writing style and everything else. So it's kind of an ode to him. My goal is to treat tech journalism in the areas that I cover: 3D printing, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, automation, and others, the same way he would have treated them, with irreverence and by asking a lot of questions that maybe nobody else was asking. And that's the approach that I like to take.
So no BS, no sacred cows, that kind of thing.
That's right.
All right, cool. So John is the CEO of Get 3D Smart. So we're not talking about home 3D printing here. We're not talking about hobbyists and makers. We're talking about manufacture, right?
Yeah, so it's my opinion that the vast majority of 3D print will be printed by someone else, and typically for pay. If you look at the 2D printing industry, desktop printers are nearly ubiquitous, yet less than 10% of all the volume happens on those devices. The vast majority of 2D printing is handled for pay by somebody else. I think the same thing will happen with 3D printing. So this conversation is certainly applicable to makers and individuals that aren't going to be manufacturing at scale. But I still think it's likely, even for those folks, that when this all plays out, they'll be more likely to go online, upload their model, or find whatever model they want and have it printed and either delivered or pick it up than they will probably by using a desktop machine. Even though that'll happen and many people will have them, the majority of the volume won't happen there.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that now you've said it, that my dad actually he started his career in printing in Canada. He was a printer in the UK, work at Mars Confectionery. He did the wrappers, and in Canada he did banknotes.
You won't believe this when I tell you this, but my dad worked for M&M Mars for 30 years.
Oh, cool. So, yeah. I mean, my dad ended up as a fireman, which is a kind of strange career shift, but he did all the old movable type and that, and he still talks affectionately about 2D printing, but 3D printing is kind of strange in that it's a prototyping tool and a manufacturing tool, but also a visualization tool. Do you think virtual reality and augmented reality will take that side away, where people will print a prototype just to see it?
Well, I think that not only virtual reality and mix augmented reality in with that, but also artificial intelligence and 3D printing will actually work together to create entirely new business models. All three of those technologies are platform enablers. They're something that can wildly change the way we look at whatever work processes we're trying to use. So it's more likely that virtual reality and 3D printing will combine in new and unique, interesting ways than it will be one technology will overcome the other. Now, if you buy into Ernie Klein's kind of model of Ready Player One, where all we want to do is sit in a seat and be in a virtual world for the majority of our lifetimes, maybe. But even then, physical products are still needed. Even if you're going to sit in the seat, there are customizations that could be made to that seat to make it more comfortable. And that's just one goofy example, but I really believe those two technologies are more cooperative than they are competitive.
Yeah, it's funny how some industries are super high tech, like the motor industry, but they still use clay to build prototype car shapes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you talked about this world of manufacturing something that's customized to the person, and I think that's one of the exciting things about 3D printing, isn't it? It's like it being bespoke for you, but at a price that is achievable for many people. And we've seen Amazon and other big retailers dip the toe into that. Do you think that's the future, where you go to Amazon, you put in your customized options, and then in the post, or via drone even, arrives your product?
Well, I'll let me take a step back and share or disclose that I was, in my previous company, we were one of the original companies that partnered with Amazon to get that product off, to get that process off the ground, to start a new category around 3D printing. So I had a lot of up close and personal experience watching it happen. That said, in this article and in the video that I just did on the two of 3D printing's biggest lies, one of the lies that I hear frequently is that complexity is free. Now, complexity comes in two forms. It could just be a different product that's been designed for different, different scenarios. Take a shoe, for example. It might be that it's available in size, 5, 6, 7, or 8. Well, if that's the case, it's not just a matter of magically stretching that file to get from 6 to 8. A new file is generally created for each of those because, the geometry inside of that file is different. That said, that means there's a lot of upfront design time, multiple designs that must be created for a single product if customization is the goal. If personalization is the goal, it gets even harder. Not only do you need some software online that's going to allow somebody to actually manage that personalization, but the workflow process of getting them to enter that data and then actually submit the order is much more difficult. You can almost smell the loss of conversion when you're using a personalized application, whether it's in 2D or 3D printing. So that cost of complexity, whether it's just, hey, the design's uniquely different and I want to do that a lot in very low quantity, or it's customized and personalized, all have the same challenge of, one, creating more effort and time on the front end, but two, the other hidden challenge that they bring to the table is, in every scenario, what they end up doing is making run length shorter and shorter and shorter, and that becomes a huge problem, at least in a service bureau environment, because then transaction cost really creeps in, and this idea that the price is flat whether I do 1 or 5 or 10, it's just not true. And personalization and customization enable that.
Yeah, do you think that is where really advanced AI or really complex algorithms are going to be needed? Because having a shoe model for each shoe size, that soon becomes untenable, because the idea of customization would be that you would have partial sizes, right? You'd have 10 and a quarter. You wouldn't have just 10, 11, 12.
Not only that, but you'd have attributes for each person. You're strike your foot on the ball and other people strike it on the heel. Well, ideally, if you're going to personalize the shoe sole, you'd want to take scan data from the individual and apply it to the design. Well, there's a whole nother set of problems. How are you going to get somebody to scan their foot? Are you going to do it with a phone app? Are you going to do it in a kiosk in a store? Where does that happen? And then once you get through that pain of that, conversion, getting somebody to go through all those steps, then how do you take that data and apply it to the shoe sole? And I think that's where a lot of AI and other more complex algorithms are going to come into play, and they already are. I mean, there's some digital, some e-commerce related tools that I've seen for 3D printing that allow you to stretch a design and play with it within the factors that the minimum maximum that have been set, but it's nowhere near advanced enough to be able to support those kind of applications.
Yeah, and even in established industries with personalization, like optical, we still have a friction with doing it via e-commerce, because people aren't sure. The quality control risk is when I'm not sure I'm going to get the right glasses for myself by ordering online, so I'm going to go to an optician, a specialist who's going to do all the measurements for me. And that's speaking as a nerd, I should be one of the first people that would go to try that.
Well, I'll bring up an important point. I tend to dive back into 2D printing frequently because I spent so much time there and watched so many of the same business processes and problems develop in that industry that have developed in 3D printing. But even now, when personalization and 2D printing is pretty mature, we've been doing it since the late 80s, early 90s, less than 15% of all print is personalized. And the reason is because even now, even when you go to a site like Vistaprint, it's still more painful to create a personalized product than it is to create a generic one. It's just not an Amazon one-click experience, and I don't think it will be anytime soon. So the big challenge, I think, is creating a product that's so valuable that people are willing to forego the pain of getting their information in order to be able to get that product. And that's one of the bigger problems inside of 3D printing, is that hunt for killer applications. And honestly, I just don't think we found that many yet.
Yeah, so we're talking quality of life or really high ROI, aren't we? We're talking about things that are going to be transformative rather than a luxury item.
Yeah, I mean, even let's say a pair of personalized shoes is $100 and a pair of generic shoes in your size is $50. Well, somebody's going to have to articulate those benefits really well for me to pony up the extra $50. And it's not just the cost, it's the friction, like you mentioned before. It's the time that I have to invest to go get my foot scanned and enter that data into the platform and then have the shoes ordered and sent. And,
Yeah.
if that, I've seen companies that are talking about doing full body scans and just turning that data over to the consumer or to a retailer. If that happened, then maybe some of that friction gets released, and that's where I think AI comes in, because it's going to look at multiple databases out there and grab the data it needs and possibly build some of the data it needs. It might be able to convert a 2D image into 3D or whatever else that a human just simply couldn't do. We just don't have access to that much information and know how to process it.
Yeah, but even then, it's not going to be in homes that quickly because just the idea of getting your 3D scan right and it being current is there's challenges there. My weight changes pounds every week, so
Yeah, mine
my
too. Yeah.
so another reason that a lot of manufacturers are looking at 3D printing is this idea of cutting the supply chain down, right? Being able to not have warehouses full of product and being able to create the product just in time when somebody hits the checkout button. So
Yeah.
do you think that's an element that's going to have some growth, or do you think there are challenges there as well?
Oh yeah, I think there'll be a lot of growth there. The question that comes out of that is, where will that happen? There's three different models that are being addressed right now. There's kind of a centralized approach where, a manufacturing company just, swaps out analog technology and swaps in digital technology. The supply chain really remains the same. It's just a matter of how many that, they're producing just in time or on demand instead of producing in bulk. There's a lot of support for that kind of transformation. And I think that'll happen relatively soon if it's not happening already in almost every industry. The more challenging ones, but the more disruptive opportunities are decentralizing production, moving it as close as possible to the consumer. The initial hype around 3D printing was that that would happen in everyone's home. It's highly unlikely that it's going to happen. It's more likely that it'll happen somewhere close by. Now, will that be a manufacturing site? Will it be a 3D print shop? Will it be a retailer? Who knows? And I've gone on record saying I think retail ought to be the supplier, at least of consumer products in that environment. But it's just a matter of who's going to take the effort to build what's going to be an incredibly expensive infrastructure. If you're talking about higher volume production type 3D printers within a mile of everyone's home, you're talking about Walmart type scale, where you would need 4 to 5,000 locations around the U.S. in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, and then you've got the unpredictability of where your cost and ROI is going to come from because there are going to be big demand areas and small demand areas, but you're not going to know until you actually offer it up, right?
Yeah, think about the number of SKUs that somebody like Walmart offers. They got about 500,000 SKUs in store and something north of 5 million SKUs online. And since they've gone to a more of a marketplace model, the number's probably gone up from there. And as a result of that, the challenge for retailers specifically is they're used to counting on their suppliers to do most of the heavy lifting. The retailer would drive traffic and move people into the store. They supplied the audience. The vendors typically supplied the products and all the marketing that went with it in order to be able to sell those products in store, right? So packaging, displays, all that other stuff. As it's gone online, vendors continue to invest in marketing. Only now they're investing in things like copywriting, photography, search engine optimization, pay per click, those kinds of things. And with 3D printing, if those same vendors came in and said, you know what, I want to open my products up to a new channel, a new digital channel instead of just a physical channel, that would be great. But there would have to be some kind of concerted effort to make that happen. Instead, if the retailer decided to do it, there would be a big investment, like I said before. But it's not like a retailer's never done this. Look at private label brands. Great Value, which Walmart owns, is one of the top 10 brands in the world. That's how much product they move in the private label space. That's good for them, not necessarily good for the other brands in their store, which they compete with. So, at retail, there's a lot of challenges around who's going to pay for the infrastructure and how does the relationship work between brands and retailers. And that's a long way from being figured out.
Yeah, and when you've got a dynamic product that could be customized, personalized, changed in all kinds of ways, and you've got the marketing costs, and you've got all the logistical costs, there are a lot of variables that are going to change between one product shipped versus another. So there's going to have to be some business thinking behind that about how margin comes into play when you don't know what the product cost is going to be.
Right, and that's a big point of my two of 3D printing's biggest lies rant, if you will, is that with transaction cost and with total cost of ownership, it's not flat. You can't just say one unit's going to cost the same as 5, as 10, as 50, or 100. Those costs still exist. They're less than they are with analog, but they still exist. So in the end, whether it's a brand, a retailer, a 3D print shop, or a manufacturer of some kind in the B2B space, they all have to be focused on killer applications that can drive enough volume to create that kind of ROI you're talking about.
Or you have to be fully automated, which is a big upfront cost.
In my video, I mentioned that specifically. Let's take company A and company B. Company B is fully manual. They enter every order by hand. There's a production manager that walks it through the facility. At the end of the end of the job, when it's finished, somebody enters it again into UPS WorldShip or one of those systems. Their transaction cost is probably $75 an order. Now, if you're fully automated, customers entering all the data up front, it's flowing right through your systems, not a lot of bodies on the floor, production is automated, shipping is integrated, all that stuff happens, then you're probably a lot less transaction cost, maybe $10 an order, but it still exists. And if you're trying to sell one product for $7 and you're going to sell them in batches of one, you're never going to make money because your cost in reality is more like $17.
Yeah, we even see that in the small scale with 3D hubs, where there are a lot of people who barely cover the costs of their equipment because they're working for less than minimum wage. As orders come in and they have difficult customers, difficult prints, they're finding that the complexity and the failed prints and getting the customer happy is so costly that the fees that you can charge on 3D hubs because of the downward pressure on prices to be competitive means it's hardly worth the time. So yep. That's on the amateur level. So we can see, with big investment, that's going to be a challenge, right?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge even at the small micro level. If you're going to buy a 3D printer, you might as well figure out how to monetize it, and 3D hubs is a great way to do that. But even then, you have to understand your total cost of ownership. You have to understand how much money you're going to invest in educating your customer, how much time you're going to spend going through revisions and editorial, what your costs are to enter an order and manage your business and do all the other stuff. And then you got to factor that into each and every order you receive. The challenge is exactly what you noted. It's downward competition on price because there's so much transparency on 3D hubs. But I saw the same thing happen in 2D print. These guys would buy big laser or inkjet printers to run the wheels off of them, and their costs were based on what did the machine cost me, how much are my consumables, and how much is my labor. And they left a bunch of costs off the table, and a lot of them, after 4 or 5 years, were just flat out of business.
Yeah, sales and invoicing is very rarely factored in because I think 3D Hubs is going to be the salesman for you, but just specking out a print can take time, right? And the backwards and forwards, and anybody that's worked in a design or production environment knows that the first product, the first output is very rarely happily accepted by the customer.
Right, absolutely. And it took years for 2D printing to figure that out. It wasn't until Adobe Acrobat got really good to the point where what you saw on the screen for the most part was what you were going to see in print, that friction went away. And we're in the same challenge with 3D printing. STL files don't tell us anything. and I know there's a lot of work around 3MF and getting this more intelligent file format, but until it comes along, until somebody can visualize on their side what they're going to see on your side, you're going to have that friction. It's going to continue. Now, one of the things that I would ask about 3D hubs, I would wonder if you looked at the busiest 20% and the least busy 20% of the people that are on 3D hubs. The busiest 20% are probably spending a lot of their time and energy marketing their services. They're not just sitting there with a catcher's mitt waiting for orders to come in. The lowest performing 20% probably just hung up a page or filled out a form and haven't done anything about it. And that's why they're not getting any business.
Yeah, and there's the people who were in the 20%, the top quintile, if you like, and drop out of it because they can't do the work for the costs that are being demanded.
What I think is interesting about 3D hubs is the number of more professional service bureaus that come into the network. That's the future of 3D hubs. It's not some guy sitting there with a MakerBot. It's somebody sitting there with 4 HP presses and 6 EOS machines that's ready to rock and roll with volume. Even in that case, they better again have a pretty low transaction cost, or that channel's not going to be viable for them.
Yeah, or they're factoring in the lifetime value of a customer and they've got added value services and they're just using it for lead gen. Because I think the future for people on 3D hubs as a small boutique has to be all the added value stuff like design and consulting and finishing, anything that isn't just the commodity of send this file, print it out.
Yeah, I think if I was, if I was a service bureau and I was using 3D hubs, I would use it for business development. And then what I would try to do is get my customers into a more formal type of contract relationship where I know I got all the business coming and I'm supplying them with software, hardware, output, whatever's needed in order for them to be able to facilitate 3D printing.
And then the
That's
cost
just,
of the sale is spread. It's not just
yeah.
a one-off.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. When you're selling each job individually, you always have that sales cost, right? So one job for $50, another job for $500, still have those costs associated with them. If you're selling on a contract basis and you've been able to acquire a customer and bring a portion or all of their volume in-house, then you can start to enjoy some of those savings because you already got a billing relationship. You already got an invoice structure that works for everybody. A lot of that, you might even be doing a summary bill once a month instead of billing each and every job. All that stuff starts to drive cost out of the equation pretty quick.
Yeah, so that would be really good advice for anybody that's listening and thinking that 3D print is a business opportunity. They have to know all the numbers, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to know them. It's not just materials and machines. It's labor cost, it's facilities, it's soft cost, it's opportunity cost, transaction cost. All of those things play a role. And that's why pricing in this industry is so difficult. It's not only a matter of, understanding how much volume can I fit in this build area and did I fill it up and my price is different if I did than I didn't. It's all the soft costs. And there really aren't a lot of total cost of ownership tools out there for people that are thinking about entering the business.
Yeah, and just the fact that you could fail 18 hours into a 24-hour print, it all has to be factored in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that ties into the whole speed, quality, and cost of 3D printing, right? That still has to improve dramatically. And to some degree, we're all sitting on our hands waiting for equipment manufacturers to do their thing, to get through their R&D cycles and get that equipment into the field. But, there's a lot more that goes on to it too, like workflow and software. Those are things that we can be doing now while we wait for those machines to get better quality and faster and cheaper and all that other stuff. But you're exactly right. You could easily be waiting 60 hours on a print and it fails in the 59th hour and you're done. You just got to start again.
You just got to eat the cost.
Yeah, there's no, it's not like there's job recovery on a 3D printer. In the 2D printing industry, if I'm printing a 500-page book and it jams at page 300, it spits out the bad pages and then starts right back where it left off. It knows how to do that. 3D printing doesn't have that.
Yeah, and again, we go back to your time. How do you cost your time out? Because, you don't want to be working for less than minimum wage when you can flip burgers and it's less frustrating. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if you're a 3D designer and used to getting $85 an hour, $100 an hour, and somebody's asking you to do a 3D print that's going to take 30 hours, are you going to charge $100 an hour? Well, you can't really, because it's not $100 an hour work and effort, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so here's some of the problems. First of all, what people will say is, "Well, I'm not standing in front of the machine. I'm multitasking. So why should I be charging for that time?" Well, because you still have to babysit the thing, right? And then there's all the questions around, if it's in your home or a small office, are you willing to leave it run all night? And if so, do you have all the safety precautions around it? I'm not saying that desktop 3D printers are dangerous, but we've seen enough incidents by now, especially with these heated level beds, for people to start thinking about that. Well, if that means you got to stay there overnight for that print to finish, or somebody's got to be there, or you got to invest in safety equipment, well, there's cost to that too.
Exactly. So for everybody listening and the people are thinking, well, I'm a 3D printing entrepreneur, or I want to get into the business side of 3D printing, or just I want to monetize my 3D printing, what would your advice be for people who are just starting out?
Well, my first bit of advice would be to understand your total cost of ownership. Make sure you know the cost for all things involved, whether it's people, processes, technology, or even access to capital. The second thing I would say is find a niche where you can start to succeed relatively quickly. Whether that means jumping on 3D hubs, marketing yourself, and driving the business, or whether that means, if you're a designer, submitting your files to somebody that you're gonna get some reward out of. I was in the file marketplace business for a while, and we'd have hundreds of designers sending us files, but we knew they wouldn't start making money until we sold that design 4 or 5 times because we had cost. Well, if you know that design isn't going to get sold that many times, don't invest the time to build it.
Yeah, so it's knowing your market and supplying a market rather than trying to create a market, right?
I just saw this thing about why startups fail, and the number one reason was there wasn't a market for whatever it is they were selling, right? So the first thing is make sure you understand the market. There are a lot of other reasons startups fail, but the second big one, although arguably I would say it's the bigger one, is the product didn't resonate with the audience. So it's product and market in most cases. I find that most people who are designers, engineers, and more mechanically oriented people typically focus on the product. They're inventors. They've created a cool product and they want to bring it to market. Others, more entrepreneurial folks, are more focused on the market and less focused on the product. But you got to have a good mix of the two in order to get it right. And it's incredibly difficult. It's estimated that 1 out of every 1,500 ideas actually becomes a product, and something like 2 or 3 out of those that actually do are successful.
Yeah, product market fit, and that includes the product itself, but also the price you can sell it for.
Absolutely. I mean, if you got to do you have to do some competitive research. It's like I watch I think there's been 2 real big killer applications for consumer 3D. When I say consumer 3D printing, I mean output, right? Yeah. The first was the bobbleheads and figurines, the 3D printed selfies. That was the first real killer application for something that you could go sell to consumers. Those sold in volume. The second one's been the fidget spinner, and it's, of course, gone to mass manufacturing at this point, but it started out as a very 3D printing friendly, was originally 3D printed product. And there's a lot of people with desktop printers that are printing fidget spinners for pay right now. But, it's a product nobody knew was going to be successful, and boom, all of a sudden it took off. And there's some learnings to be had there that if you can find that right product and get the right kind of backing out of it, get people interested enough in it, find the right influencers or what. I mean, when, Barron Trump walks off a Air Force or a Marine One and he's playing with a fidget spinner, all of a sudden the world goes crazy, right? So yeah, there's some of that too. You got to find those kinds of products that are going to resonate with people. And there are many more to come in consumer products, but we got to find them. And then be aware of
and preferably not a commodity where somebody can drive the cost down by injection molding.
Sure, but this is where 3D printing can be so successful, is with moment marketing, right? So a trend happens, Katy Perry's Left Shark falls off the stage during the Super Bowl, and tomorrow there are 3D printed, Left Shark figurines. It's going to take mass manufacturing 2 or 3 months to catch up to that demand, and that's where 3D printing has to be very focused on, is when trends happen in the market, how do we convert them into products, and how do we get them into the market quickly?
Yeah. Awesome. So we've come up to the 30-minute mark. I'd love to get you back on the show so we can talk more. Would you be up for that?
Sure. Just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Do give us a review, give us a like, share with your friends, and most of all, listen out next time. And we'll definitely get John back on to talk about the business side of 3D printing. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.